Farm Progress Broadcast presents This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. Brought to you by Case IH, solutions for every challenge, equipment for every farm. Case IH, built by farmers.
Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us here for This Week in Agribusiness. I'm Mike Pearson. Crop insurance, nutrition spending, and disaster aid. All of that will be included in discussions about the next Farm Bill. We've seen conversations heat up over the past several weeks with the release of different drafts of Farm Bill legislation, and our own Patrick Haggerty recently had a chance to check in with the Senate side, and he brings us that update.
This Week in Agribusiness in the U.S. Senate today, and we're with the chairwoman of the Senate Agriculture Committee, Senator Debbie Stabenow. Senator, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure, Pat.
I know you and your committee have worked very hard on the Farm Bill.
Yes.
Give America's farmers and ranchers an update. Where are we and where are we going?
Well, let me say, first of all, that I've been around long enough to be involved in 6 farm bills, one in the U.S. House and 5th one now in the Senate. 3rd one I've led. And so I know what it takes to get a bill done. I know how important the certainty is for our farmers and ranchers. And so we are working hard to get something done. It's always complicated, it never gets done on time, but I do have to say it's a little more complicated than I would like right now. There are different visions in the House and the Senate, although there are similarities. In the House bill, we're close on our approach on dairy, which is great. We're close on our approach on specialty crops, which is great. We have a different view in terms of priorities of crop insurance versus the commodity title, which affects 22 crops. And crop insurance affects everybody, potentially large and small.
Right.
And unfortunately, even though there's a huge amount of dollars put in the commodity title, it ends up close to a $40 billion unpaid for amount of money. Most of it goes to 10% of the largest, wealthiest farmers, and they have less than 10% going to crop insurance.
So do they think there are going to be major changes in their risk management tools?
Well, what I hear from farmers, and what we've heard in all of our hearings, is not so much changes, but really making things work better. Lower cost crop insurance, marketing loans. We need to raise the cap on the loans. When we look at input costs, we look at interest rates and so on.
Is there going to be a farm bill? Are we going to go to continued resolution? Or are we going to have a farm bill this year?
I hope so. I'm the eternal optimist. And so, I see a path. If we use the tried and true approach of every other farm bill and say we're not cutting nutrition, we're not adding money or subtracting money from the nutrition title. We're leaving it where it is. We're going to focus on farmer risk management tools. We're going to focus within the budget that we have, not make promises that cannot be kept, which I'm very concerned about, and then just build that bipartisan coalition.
Well, let's talk about the House and Senate. Are you talking to House Chairman Glenn Thompson?
Sure.
Do you see some problems, or is that going to work out?
Well, we have a different approach. I talk to my friend and ranking member John Bozeman all the time. I've gotten to know GT. I like him very much. I think he's very sincere in wanting a farm bill.
Right.
He's got a whole lot of different kinds of pressures than we do. He's got a group in the House, 170 Republicans who came out. They're the group that wants to cut everything, who came out with their own budget, and it cuts every part of ag. It cuts not just food assistance, but
everything.
Crop insurance, commodity tax. So he has a different set of pressures than we have in the Senate, but we have to focus on the doable. Farmers are very practical. I'm very practical,
right.
And you have to focus on what keeps the coalition together in order to get a bill done.
It's kind of like, remember former Chairman Kika de la Garza said, legislation is the art of the possible.
Totally.
The art of the possible. So I see you didn't bring your crystal ball here today.
I wish, yeah.
But if you had your crystal ball, are we going to have a farm bill and when?
We can have.
And I know you left your crystal ball in the office.
Yeah, we can do a farm bill by the end of the year if people want to do it. If people want to do it, we will have a farm bill.
Terrific. Well, Senator Stabenow, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
In the United States Senate, I'm Patrick Haggerty. This Week in Agribusiness.
Today's larger, heavier equipment can lead to more soil compaction issues. Firestone Ag IFVF tires with 82 technology maximize load capacity while minimizing soil compaction. Visit firestoneag.com to learn more. Now it's time to take a look at the markets. Joining us this week is Dan Hussey. He's a senior market strategist with Zaner Ag Hedge. And Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Mike.
This past week was interesting with the federal holiday in the middle of the week giving traders a break. What was the big story in the commodity markets this week, Dan?
Well, I think the big story, not just this week, but even leading up into this week, has been how much of the weather market and the new heat we're seeing coming here in June is really going to affect this crop and its maturity into July. We had a late plant, this spring. That's going to push back that maturity date and that pollination a little bit. So there is some time on the clock for temperatures to maybe recede a little bit. But seeing 90, 95 plus heat across the Midwest is not a great sign to start things off for the summer.
It's not. Should that give growers pause if they're looking to market some of that old crop, see if this market will come to us a little bit, or is the risk just too big?
I think the risk is unfortunately too big. There's also, ironically, rain in these forecasts. So you look out 14 days, and while we've got above average heat for June, we've also got above average rain, which is kind of counterintuitive if you're hoping for that summertime heat or a little bit of a weather market. We're also seeing heat temperatures into the overnight session recede down into the 70s. So any kind of stress the crop was getting, it's getting some relief in the overnight as well.
Dan, we've seen a lot of talk about South America, both corn and soybeans. But on the corn side, that safrinha crop, what do we know coming out of South America? Does it look like it's going to be bigger?
It does look like it's going to be a monster crop at this point. And unfortunately, we haven't seen the exports from the United States balance sheet that you would hope to see from China and others that would, maybe signal for some concerns that that crop isn't going to be there. That's not happening. They continue to be a buyer in South America. They're skipping over particularly our soybean market. And we're seeing most of our corn go to places like Japan, Mexico, our traditional buyers that really haven't, where we'd rather see China maybe come in a big way.
Dan, are you doing anything right now with that December corn? Anything producers need to be thinking about?
I definitely think putting in a floor here at some point, and not just to throw one out there, but that 460 area happens to be really important. Going below it seems to be, hey, from a technical standpoint, a head and shoulders pattern. That would suggest that the fall off that we had from the 470 to 480 recently created that right shoulder in that pattern. And breaking below 460 could open the door, unfortunately, to retesting those February lows. And I don't know about you, Mike, but I don't remember finding a yearly low or a low time frame in that February, even before a crop got into the ground. So that brings into pause that, hey, if we find and search out for a harvest low, how much far down could that crop or that price chart go?
Oof, that is a risk out there in corn. Dan, let's talk soybeans because we've also seen soybeans continue to sell off. This month of June has been hard on both old and new crop. Are we getting close to a bottom in your mind?
Well, like the corn, unfortunately, it seems like the chart has turned over from a standpoint. But there is the concern that we haven't seen exports where we need them and want them, and almost no exports when you look at new crop at this point. And that's not a great concern if for the commercial side looking for that bottom to form. And certainly the question then will be, where is the buyer? And prices will probably go down to try to hunt that out.
And the buyer right now is probably still mainly China, and they're going to South America for their needs. Is that right?
That's correct. And that South American crop being much larger than originally anticipated. We can talk all we want about the spread between the USDA and CONAB numbers, but the reality is that both analysts are using different benchmarks. A little bit higher acreage number there used by the USDA to start things off. And when we see the CONAB numbers get walked down on yield, we have to remember there's probably acres in the northern part of the country that aren't being counted. There's also been a concern that China has started unloading meal on the international market. And you don't see China unloading meal, and if they don't want to replace that for their crush capacity, it brings a lot of question to what is China doing at this point.
Right. Why did they buy those beans, crush them, and then sell the meal? Interesting. We'll have more with Dan Hussey of Zaner Ag Hedge when we return. Today's larger, heavier equipment can lead to more soil compaction issues. Firestone Ag IFBF tires with 82 technology maximize load capacity while minimizing soil compaction. Visit firestoneag.com to learn more. And we're back talking markets with Dan Hussey, senior market strategist at Zaner Ag Hedge. And Dan, before the break, we were talking about the soybean market. It looks like planting is likely to be complete on Monday for those soybeans. Should growers be doing anything with regard to their November contracts?
Yeah, you'd see that number coming in at 93% last week, up 6% week over week. kind of benchmarks or pegs it at maybe 100% this following week. So now that we're done with plantings, right, and the crop is in the ground, we're certainly going to be shifting our focuses a little bit more towards the weather markets for beans, the development there, but we're still so far out from where, in my opinion, you really catch that weather market for soybeans, right? There's a lot of time for things to improve. And when you look at the charts, you're looking at a technical picture that just keeps coming down. We've rallied up into some big technical levels, big rejections at 200-day moving averages a week ago, now below that 18-day moving average and seemingly heading south. Although we got a little bit of a bounce here this last week, that's even been abating here into the end of the week. And you know, just like corn, you can't ignore that February low doesn't seem like a number that you can really hang your hat on and have confidence that that's going to be the low or hold at this point. So prepare for retests of those levels and maybe, you know, think about reownership when we finally get down there, rather than ahead of the fall here, where you could be doing a lot to sell your crop and get some protection in for the downside.
That makes a lot of sense, Dan. Let's turn our focus over to the wheat market because that has been an ugly June for all classes of wheat. Chicago continues to decline. Dan, are we getting close to a bottom?
You'd like to think so, but when you look at the speed at which the wheat market has sold off here, it has come down just as fast, if not faster than it rallied, with little to no recovery, with the exception of maybe one day here in the last 2 weeks where we really had an outside day higher, which has faded away and found new lows. Wheat is, of course, into its new marketing year already. There's a different story to be told there. There's concerns over Russian wheat production, which also seem to be being ignored by the market. I guess the age-old adage of sell wheat, live in a mansion reigns true this year. But you'd like to think that a market that has become this oversold is getting closer to a bottom than not. But I'm not willing to say that bottom's in just yet.
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to need a news event, some kind of thing to change the narrative in the wheat trade. Dan, let's talk livestock. Lean hogs, which have also been trending down this week, appear to have maybe changed their tune a little bit. What's happening in the lean hog trade?
Yeah, we've seen what is referred to as a key reversal. When markets hunted out a new contract low in the August hog, we then put in an outside day higher, which is a day that closes higher on the day and takes out the prior day's high. That is typically a technical reversal, and the big C word of capitulation comes into the charts. I know managed money futures there reduced their long positions down to only about 6,000 contracts. I'm expecting them to maybe have flipped short into this next CFTC report, which would, all intents and purposes, be kind of a changing of the guard, so to speak, and maybe a reversal in that sentiment.
Man, so much is going to depend on the economy as we look down through this the remainder of the year. Dan Hussey, you'll be watching. Do you think we'll find some consumer strength here as the year goes on?
That's the big challenge here is the broader inflation trade. It's a rising tide. Consumers seem to be at least hanging on for now. But the broader economy, any kind of slowdown and interest rates rising could be a wet blanket on all of that.
Certainly could. Lots to watch as summer goes on. Dan Hussey, Senior Market Strategist with Steiner Ag Hedge. Thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead.
Well, the summer weather outlook continues to heat up. Greg Solier joins us now. And Greg, in the Pacific Northwest, it looks like next week could see some more action?
Yeah, later in the week, and it seems like about every week to 10 days we get a pretty sizable upper trough to make its move into the Pacific Northwest. So the usual expanding dryness-related issues, as you would expect for early summertime, continues on. And with that, a little moisture from time to time. Of course, about a week to 10 days ago, had some pretty impressive low elevation snows around 4,000 or 5,000 feet. But early on this week, it's the warm to hot ridge and kind of a little modified ring of fire trying to establish itself into parts of the northern and central plains. So some storm clusters here, warmth all the way up into Montana, and of course dryness and drought on last week's drought monitor as well. And here is that late week weather system coming on to frame here in the middle part of the week through northern California and into the Pacific Northwest it goes. And again, a nice upper air trough. The highest peaks above probably 8,000 or 9,000 feet. We'll get some snow, a couple of showers into the Willamette Valley, Rogue River Basin, maybe some thunderstorm activity back into the northern and central plains. The warmth here, so except for maybe the northern Rockies, a pretty typical mid to late June setup, and a little moisture too into parts of the Pacific Northwest and the northern plains. Readings have been pretty much seasonal. A little pickup on irrigation and runoff demands into California, the valley locales. Looky here, this was the first named tropical system out of the Atlantic Basin. Alberto, a little remnant feature but this is still the worst of ongoing dryness and drought in New Mexico back into West Texas. So, yeah, some showers and thunderstorms with daytime heating. Some of those will work into the plains as well, but the potential for some flash flooding. So, pretty active weather pattern for the southwestern reaches of the country. Quiet through the valleys of California, seasonal heat, and there's another prod of some heat and humidity into much of the central and southern plains, Mike, with temperatures back into the mid to upper 90s. They made some rapid progress out there in some of the western half of the plains with winter wheat harvest operations.
With that heat and humidity pushing into the central part of the U.S., Greg, is severe weather on your radar next week?
Yeah, these storm clusters, these ridge riding clusters, it's kind of a flat ridge generally speaking here over the next 10 days to 2 weeks. So we'll still see a propensity for a couple of thunderstorm outbreaks in this particular area. We move in from heat and humidity, at times less heat and humidity, and at times a couple of thunderstorms, and you can roll the dice on that. But yeah, a couple of severe storms over parts of the plains, a push of at least some drier air will ease temperature and humidity levels down across parts of the Corn Belt. And again, a couple of scattered thunderstorms for parts of the Corn Belt, especially northern reaches. And boy, they are waterlogged coming off last week's big rains and storms across the Arrowhead of Minnesota, parts of Wisconsin. So par for the course stuff for mid to late June. And yeah, a little critical. Things are getting a bit dry into some of those eastern Corn Belt locales. Meanwhile, there's the remnants of Alberta across Arizona, some flash flood potential there. Gulf Coast areas pretty quiet for now. Heat and humidity surging northward into areas of the Ozarks. We'll get a couple of boundaries to move on south and ease temperatures and humidity a bit from the Mississippi on eastward. And again, a couple of thunderstorms and the leftover tropical air mass across the Rio Grande. Probably some drought improvement noted, Mike, into the Rio Grande Valley coming off those tropical rains over the past week to 10 days.
As you look all the way to the east, Greg, I understand heat is going to be a concern next week. Is that what you're watching?
Yeah, boy, last week 110-degree heat index values of all places into parts of western Pennsylvania, and heat advisories and warnings. But again, we move these spells of warmth and more comfortable outdoor work environments with spells of some heat and humidity. That's a story early in the week. Later in the week, another comfortable air mass. But note the absence of any organized rains in the eastern Corn Belt, with some expanding dry pockets noted. Some tasseling corn too, others replanted over the past week to 10 days. A couple of storm clusters into parts of the western and northwestern Corn Belt on the warm front and the ridge riding setup. Some thunderstorm activity into the southeastern parts of the plains, the heat all the way up to the Ohio Valley. We do have some lowering pressures here across the southwest and Atlantic, and we may perhaps with time by the late portion of the week begin to see some of that tropical moisture work northward into some of the drier areas of the Carolinas. Otherwise, pretty much heat and humidity as you would expect for mid to late June over the southeastern part of the country, with a couple of thunderstorms into parts of the Delta region, southeastern plains. But overall, that weather picture is as you would expect for the time of year. We'll have the long-range outlook taking you through July coming up later in the broadcast.
Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Pentair Hypro, a global leader in innovative spray technology for farmers for over 75 years.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Higher food prices. We've all noticed the price of food going up at the grocery store over the past several years, but how are we responding to it? That was the question from the May edition of the Consumer Food Insights from the Center for Food Demand at Purdue University. Joining us now to talk through the details is Dr. Joseph Balaktas. He serves as a professor for ag economics, and he's the director of the Center for Food Demand. And Dr. Balaktas, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Mike. I'm happy to be with you.
Let's talk a little bit first about the Consumer Food Insight Survey. Doctor, what is that? What is Purdue trying to do?
So the Consumer Food Insights Survey is a monthly survey of about 1,200 Americans where we ask consumers about their behavior and preferences in food markets. It allows us to keep our finger on the pulse of those markets and understand what's happening in the food space.
And there is certainly a lot happening. Prices are higher. This has been a big issue in the economy for the past several months. What was the question to the survey takers here in this month's CFI?
Yeah, so there's a set of questions that we ask every month about behavior and their experience. This particular month, we also asked about how consumers are perceiving inflation, food inflation in particular, and how they're responding to it in their experiences.
All right, well, let's get the details. First, official figures. Over 2023, Doctor, what was the official rate of food inflation?
So using the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index, food prices overall were up in May. That's the most recent data, 2.1% over the previous May. So over a 1 year period, food prices are up 2.1%. They're up less than that, 0.1% for groceries, and more than that for restaurant food, 4.4 percentage points higher.
Gotcha. But that is coming down. That rate of inflation is slowing. Dr. Balagtas, do consumers feel as though that rate is slowing?
Yeah, consumers do feel inflation is slowing. A year ago, they were telling us that food price inflation was 6 or so percent. They were actually a little high. They're still a little high. The inflation that consumers are telling us they feel is higher than those official numbers, but lower than what they were telling us a year ago. So they are telling us prices are slowing, inflation's slowing.
All right. And of course, everybody responds to these higher prices in a different way. What did you see generationally with regard to how consumers are dealing with this?
Yeah. So first of all, not everybody responds. And one of the generational differences we see is that the oldest generations, baby boomers and older, are most likely not to respond. Almost 40% of baby boomers and older, not that they're not experiencing food prices rising, but they're not really changing their behavior. So that's one generational difference. We see Gen X a little more active, looking for coupons and deals. We see Gen Z not using coupons and deals so much, but shopping across stores, looking for lower prices across stores.
Interesting. So we are seeing at least some of these groups take a response from these higher prices. You mentioned, Dr. Balagtas, the expectations of inflation. They have been there. They've been persistent. Looking out into the future, do consumers still expect that inflationary increase to be there? And if so, by how much?
Yeah, so food price inflation expectations are down about a percentage point from a year ago. Consumers are telling us they think food prices are going to rise at 4% over the next year. That's about double what we've experienced over the past year. But they've been predicting higher for the last year or so, and so they see the prices coming down, but not as fast as what the official numbers are saying.
All right. Well, now that we've got this information, now that we can see how people are reacting to these prices, Dr. Balagtas, what can we do with this information? What's next?
One thing is just to try to understand what consumers are doing. There's a little bit of a debate about why economists like me are predicting or are measuring food price inflation that's so much lower than people's experience. Obviously, people are experts in their own experience. We're not telling people that they misunderstand their own lives. But we might be using terms slightly differently, and that could explain part of the difference, right? If I ask someone what food prices were in June last year, they might not know exactly, but they know prices have fallen or have risen a lot over that time period, and over the last 3 years. Food prices are about 25% higher than they were just before the pandemic. So we'll continue to survey consumers and try to understand how they're dealing with food prices into the future.
Absolutely. As time goes on, Dr. Joseph Balagtas, Director of the Center for Food Demand at Purdue University, thanks so much for joining us here this week and explaining the most recent CFI.
Good to be with you, Mike.
Farm Progress Broadcast presents This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry. Brought to you by Case IH, solutions for every challenge, equipment for every farm. Case IH, built by farmers.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. On last Monday's Crop Conditions in Progress report, I noticed that the corn crop in the state of North Carolina was rated nearly 23% poor to very poor, and I wanted to get the details. So we're talking now with Mike Davis. He's the news director for the Southern Farm Network out of Raleigh, North Carolina. Mike, thanks for making the time to talk with us.
Mike, glad to be here.
Fully a quarter of North Carolina's corn is in poor to very poor condition. Mike, what's the situation on the ground in North Carolina this summer?
Dry right now and especially hot, Mike. What we've had through the month of June, coming into June, we had good soil moisture in North Carolina and South Carolina. But for the last several weeks, we just have not been able to buy a drop of rain in the Carolinas. And that has really taken a toll in the last few weeks on the corn crop. That's why we're starting to see a lot of those leaves are starting to curl now, just trying to protect themselves, particularly in the afternoon heat. And what makes it even worse is that we've got a heat dome that's coming in right now, and this weekend is going to be the hottest weekend of the year. We're looking at temperatures in the Sandhills of North Carolina are going to be approaching 100 degrees on Sunday, and so we're not expecting any relief in the near future.
Oh my, struggles look to continue for those North Carolina growers. Mike, while we've got you, I know you have the chance to check in weekly with the commissioners of agriculture in both North and South Carolina. And I want to get your thoughts on South Carolina's peach crop. What have we heard coming out of that state with regard to the peaches this summer?
Now, that's a different story, Mike, and that's good news for South Carolina. As you may recall, the Southeast took it on the chin last year with their peach crop. We had a March late hard freeze that came in, and that wiped out about 50% of the peach crop in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. This year, it's a different story. We've had great conditions, and right now we've got about 25% of that peach crop in South Carolina has been harvested, and the growers, they are pretty excited about it. They've got a good looking fruit, and it is quite tasty. I have partaken, and it's in good shape right now, so they're pretty happy with the results.
Well, that's always good to hear. It's nice to find some silver linings in a tough summer like this. Mike, of course, you've got a lot of cattle production down there across North and South Carolina. Pastures hanging in there yet thanks to the early rain, or are they starting to get sparse?
Yeah, we're starting to get a little crispy right now, and especially in the eastern parts of North and South Carolina. Now, a lot of that cattle, fortunately, is to the west. We get that in the Piedmont and in the upcountry of North and South Carolina. It's not quite as bad there, but it is starting to dry out a bit.
Lots to watch as summer moves on. That's Mike Davis, the news director for the Southern Farm Network. Mike, thanks for joining us here on This Week in Agribusiness.
Thanks, Mike. Anytime.
Greg Sodier is back now with his extended farm weather forecast for the nation.
Well, Greg, let's take a look at those precipitation totals next week. Where do you think the bulk of that's going to fall?
Of all places, down through Texas, parts of the southwestern reaches of the country. But you know, you throw tropical moisture in, those elevated dew points, daytime heating, and it's all or nothing with downpour producing showers and thunderstorms. Some of the worst drought areas in through southern New Mexico, but when you put 1 to 3 inches of that on top of it in a hurry, things could become problematic. There should be later in the week some organized rains in some of the drier areas of the Carolinas back into the Delta, and some lowering pressures across the southwestern Atlantic here and the western Gulf of Mexico. So things getting busy in what should be a busy tropical season out of the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico. Meanwhile, probably some 1/4 to 1/2 inch moisture. We'll take it in some of the drier areas of the eastern Corn Belt. Finally, outside of a stray shower, some dry time coming off some 6+ inches of rain last week over sections of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and as far south as northern Iowa, a couple of inches there, and scant moisture into the Pacific Northwest. A pattern change, essentially, the southern U.S. getting more organized rains for this week.
Greg, for the first full week of July, are we going to have a hot Independence Day?
It's going to be a hot one, and I tell you, you're perhaps out there scouting the fields, or maybe a get-together, a barbecue, long lines at your favorite beverage stand. With this particular setup, this is mid and upper 90-degree air. Again, this is essentially what the summertime forecast is going to be, ebbing and flowing between very warm to hot to maybe spells of heat wave weather, and yeah, expanding, increasing drought concerns, and a forecast of that by the weather forecaster here. Warmth over the southeastern part of the country, western states, some cooling into the Pacific Northwest, but it's these ridge-riding thunderstorms that will provide some relief, all or nothing on these storms set up into the western Corn Belt, parts of the plains, maybe some significant drought relief all at once into parts of Texas, the Gulf Coast. Tropics will stay active in the Gulf, and again, we'll keep an eye in the southwest Atlantic into the first week of July.
Does that hot weather lobe start to move as you get into the week of July 8th?
Yeah, it kind of oscillates, or what we call retrogrades, back and forth. Here it is moving from this particular part of the country. Yes, weather will back up, and that's the system, their setup that we see here heading through mid-July as jet stream winds kind of strengthen and move a bit of a cooler air mass into areas of the northeastern part of the country. Normal temperatures down across the southeastern sections of the country. And again, the hot dome over the middle part of the country, and moisture shapes up like this with a couple of systems to keep an eye out for. Western Gulf again, southwestern Atlantic, note the theme there. So the southern states pick up significant moisture, and the Pacific Northwest, nothing going on in the northern and eastern Corn Belt.
Take us to July 21st, Greg.
Little change again, back and forth, the way it's going to go. Here's the hot dome back into position here. Triple-digit readings for parts of the Corn Belt, the plains. Temperatures about normal over the southeastern part of the country. Weather pattern stays active here in through the southern reaches of the plains, Pacific Northwest, with expanding dryness and drought for the eastern Corn Belt. More normalized moisture in the western complex.
Our Farm Progress Roundup is sponsored by Brandt Industries. Lead the field with Brandt's lineup of heavy-duty grain carts and make the most of your harvest season. Visit Brandt.ca for more. Folks, a lot of the people here on the Farm Progress team wear many hats, and Kurt Arns, the editor of Nebraska Farmer, is one of those. He's a journalist, he also is a farmer, and as of recently, he's become a podcaster. Kurt, thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Thanks, Mike, for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Let's talk about your operation. I understand you're the fourth generation on your family farm. Kurt, fill us in. What do you guys raise?
Well, in our area in northeast Nebraska, we have corn and soybeans, but over the years, we used to have hogs, like a lot of folks around us, but today it's cow-calf, corn and soybeans. Years ago, we also had oats, wheat, and in our area, alfalfa and forages are a big deal. We're a big livestock area, and so we have a fair amount of alfalfa as well. I rent out my crop ground, still have cows, but I farmed for 25 years before I became involved in the Farm Progress Group and started writing for Nebraska Farmer.
And of course, you cover the entire state of Nebraska for Nebraska Farmer. How are conditions looking across the state for those crops, Kurt?
Well, as far as moisture conditions, we're a lot better than we were a year ago, right? As most of the Corn Belt, we've gained a lot of moisture. Soil moisture is pretty good. In fact, maybe a little too good in some places. But even in southeast Nebraska, that was under extreme drought last year, the drought monitor looks really good right now. And much of the state is out of any type of drought, except for perhaps the extreme southwest. There's water standing in a few fields. It's raining today here. Anytime you get rain the end of June in Nebraska, it's a good day, right? So, weather conditions have been very good.
That's fantastic, Kurt. And of course, Nebraska Farmer covering a lot of big issues important to farmers in Nebraska. What are the topics you're watching for this next summer?
Well, in our July issue that will be coming out print, we had a behind-the-scenes look at the Nebraska Tractor Test Laboratory in Lincoln. A lot of folks are familiar with the Nebraska Tractor Test and its importance in making sure that our farmers get what they are paying for as far as tractors go. And so that's been a very interesting, story to follow up on. We've got a bunch of photos from the Tractor Test Lab. So that's kind of one of the really big stories. Of course, there'll be a lot more coming on the crop side coming into August and September as well.
Absolutely. It won't be long. We'll be talking harvest. And of course, folks can hear you on the FP Next podcast, which I understand they can get any place they'd like to find their podcast. Kurt Arns, thank you so much for talking with us this week.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, where we spotlight another great American farm tractor. Well, Father's Day weekend was celebrated in many farm families with the help of an old tractor. I'll give you an example from Texas. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by Mystic Lubricants. Mystic Lubricants are made to make it last. Well, before I get to this week's tractor, I want to follow up on something from last week about that old toolbox that was on the back of my Super H. I finally, Father's Day afternoon, took a look at what had been in that old toolbox.
for the past 30 years or more, and it was just what you would expect. There were the tools, there were the nuts, bolts, and washers, a well-worn hitch pin, sprayer screens and tips, nothing of value to anybody except maybe Max. But you know what? I may fix up, may restore that old toolbox. Let's take you to Texas, where Father's Day was special because of a John Deere 3010. Sure enough, at Sweetwater, Texas, Mr. Alton Pyburn turned 92 on Father's Day. These days, he's getting to see his old John Deere 3010 used out in the field. He bought that tractor back in the 90s. It just sat in a state of disrepair for about 10 years, and finally, last summer, Alton's grandson, Ashel Pyburn, decided to get it running again so he could use it some as he raises cattle there in central Texas. It was a lot of work, but I'm certain Ashel Pyburn was glad he brought back to life Grandpa Alton's John Deere 3010 in time for his granddad's 92nd birthday. Paging Mark Stock. Mark Stock. Is Mark Stock in the house? Sure he is, with his weekly report from Big Iron.
Well, hello, Max. We're just about through the month of June, and we've sold an enormous amount of machinery here so far this month. On Tuesday, June 25th, Gary Cassins is retiring. He's by Sterling, Illinois, selling a John Deere S770 combine and a 2022 John Deere 1775 NT 24-row 30 planter and many more items. On Wednesday, June the 26th, Acres Equipment will sell 5 late model tractors. 2023 year model John Deere 8RX 374 track tractor and an 8R370. Brian Buckholtz is from Waverly, Iowa, and will sell 92 items. New Holland forage harvester with heads, Gale 970 silage wagons, Tempty super hopper grain trailers, and many more items. And on June the 27th, the Martin Connell Estate Sale by Delmer, Iowa will take place, selling a 2022 John Deere 8R370 mechanical front tractor, 2023 John Deere S780 combine. There's a 2024 John Deere 1795 MaxEmerge 5E 24-row 20-inch planter that has never been in the field. For more information on these auctions and to discuss your auction, please reach out to Big Iron and Sullivan Auctioneers.
Our FFA Chapter Tribute is brought to you by Pioneer, developing new generations of seed innovations for new generations of farmers. Pioneer, what's next happens here. This week, we're talking with Eric Wisely. He recently completed his term as Illinois State FFA Vice President. And Eric, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Horses, I understand, are what brought you into FFA. Eric, give us a little bit of your agricultural background.
Yeah, so obviously not the traditional production background with agriculture, but my family raises, trains, and shows American quarter horses. And that's something that my dad started and I continued, and that's what got me involved in FFA and agriculture. I was encouraged to take up a equine science SAE or record book and compete in the horse judging CDEs, and then from there I just kind of ran with it.
And of course, got involved in leadership, continued your service, and now you've wrapped up 1 year of service as Illinois Vice President, just finished convention. Eric, what were some of the highlights of this year's FFA convention?
I feel like every year the highlights are just getting to see how many FFA members we can recognize and get across that stage. This year in particular, we had the highest number of state degree recipients that we've ever had in the state, with 604 state degree recipients. So it made for a long state degree session, but definitely well worth it getting to recognize all of those FFA members and their accomplishments. And then my personal favorite part of convention and favorite thing to see awarded is our National Chapter Award, Premier Chapters. So those winning chapters in the areas of building communities, strengthening agriculture, growing leaders, and seeing how awesome all those things are that those FFA chapters are doing in Illinois.
There's so much to watch throughout FFA. Eric Wisely, thank you so much for filling us in on the Illinois State FFA this week.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Colby Ag Tech is brought to you by Copperhead Ag Products. Visit copperheadag.com for more information. Well, this week in the tech segment, Chad Colby has some new technology that could help farmers really keep things looking tidy out in the field.
You know me, I love talking about the latest in technology, but sometimes stuff's out a little bit ahead of time. You guys had a chance to test AutoPath here on your farm here in central Indiana. Talk a little bit about that technology.
We had a chance to try the AutoPath boundaries this spring, and we had never went out and made good boundaries ourselves. So we went out with a Ranger and RTK and drove those boundaries, and then we loaded them in the computer, obviously, to make it work. Right. And in that program then, within Ops Center, it draws your first 2 passes around the field, and then it lays out each pass across the field, similar to how AutoPath Harvest does with the individual rows after you've planted, but it's ahead of time. So it works with sprayers, ammonia, absolutely every pass across the field to lay it out so that at least on one side you won't have bulk rows.
So we're sitting in your shop here, you got a couple planters. I have to think, once you set that up with your planters, like you mentioned, side dress sprayer, talk about that. Sprayer. That had to be really neat.
Yeah, it worked great in the sprayer. We switched to 20-inch row beans this spring, and we put a globe on the planter as well, so we AutoPath those. Now, the sprayer's actually driving by AutoPath rows and staying between the 20-inch rows with the AutoTrack row vision guidance on the sprayer. So, you know, that makes a huge difference when you can stay off those 20-inch rows instead of crossing them. We'd always been 15s, but...
You know, I think some of the challenge with new technology is from an operations standpoint. You know, it's like talking about a new smartphone. Everybody's afraid of that upgrade. What was it like trying it for the first time? Was it pretty intuitive? Did it work pretty good?
It was pretty intuitive. You know, first time you pass a telephone pole, first time you pass a tree, you're a little nervous, but we put a lot of folks have done boundaries, but you put a stick out to the side and you're supposed to be as wide as your, you know, the furthest implement from your row, and just trust and believe.
Wait, so it passed the test here. It's going to stay for next
year?
It
did. It passed the test, yeah.
Well, George, I appreciate you sharing that with us. I think the neat part about some of this technology is I think everybody needs to know. A lot of this stuff's been in the field a couple years before it's for sale. Of course, AutoPath's available now at your dealer. So neat stuff. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chad, for that update. It will be interesting to see how this impacts farmers' efficiencies as they make it through the remainder of the season. And folks, leave it here. We'll have more This Week in Agribusiness when we return. Yes, it's summertime. It's that great time of year to use that classic tractor, either out in the fields, on a tractor ride, or maybe at a county or state fair. But sometimes you need the right parts to keep those pieces of equipment in motion, and Max Armstrong knows where to find them.
Steiner Stories, as we introduce to you folks at Steiner Tractor Parts at their headquarters at Lennon, Michigan. Craig Craven, I've gotten to know you over the past few years. It's wonderful to see you again.
It's nice to see you too, Max. We've had a couple conversations.
Yeah, you're always flashing parts at me. You're always showing me great stuff from the Steiner line. And many of the things you have made specifically and stocked in your inventory.
Yeah, we actually make our own parts, you know, like I said, not here per se, right? You can see behind me, this is more of a warehouse facility, but yeah, we have our own parts made and manufactured so that they're right, and we have a couple of them here today actually for you.
What are some of the new things? Give me an example of something that maybe you hadn't had in your inventory in the past.
Like we're coming out with new parts all the time. The ones I brought to you today are kind of like exclusive to us, to be honest with you. So I'd like to show you those.
Show me a
today.
favorite.
Yeah, so this is actually one of everybody's favorite, to be honest with you. It is our JDS 3237. It's a John Deere seat-based repair kit, and it fits most of the new gen tractors for John Deere. So
those are highly collectible, some of those are, and some of them carry some big price tags, those tractors.
Oh, they really do. Well, you've seen that, like the auctions and stuff that we've been at, that they certainly carry
right.
some big price tags.
Let the record show, though, you store parts for all lines of tractors, most all.
Yeah, we do, yep. So almost all the major brands we pretty much have here in stock and ready to ship out at any time.
Do you respond to requests to folks? I mean, if you get several requests about something, I would imagine you look at getting that part in your lineup then.
Yeah, I mean, really, we're small enough that everybody is pretty much a part of our community and family, so even our customers. So they call us all the time and they'll give us suggestions, and what happens is we keep track of that. So if we get enough suggestions, I mean, obviously we got to have what the customer wants, so we'll make it.
Show me something that isn't a long green line. Yeah, you have something there?
Yeah, I actually have for you too as well. This is our IHS 3379. It's a dipstick replacement, right? So you remember the old petcocks? Well, actually, you have a Farmall 8.
I have one.
Yeah, so you might need to take one.
I'm going to take a look at that, pal.
So it's going to fit the John Deere row crops, and it's going to fit the Farmall letter series. Most of them. So don't quote me on that. You're going to need to go to the website and check that out. But I know it fits your Farmall H, right? So you're going to need to take one home. And what it does is it converts the petcocks. Right, remember opening the petcocks, oil dripping on the ground.
Quite often I'd have to get a pair of pliers.
Exactly.
That thing was all scarred up.
Now you have a dipstick, right? So this will replace that, and then you can just check the oil, just like now that everybody does it that way. So that's how we do it.
That really follows with your slogan, "New parts for old tractors," doesn't it?
It really does. We bring new parts to the market all the time, and we're just tractor people trying to hang out with other tractor people, really. So.
And it's enjoyable.
Take
it from two guys who know, all right?
Yeah. Like I said, I'm going to need your money, though.
Craig Craven, good to see you again. Thanks for allowing us to visit with you here at the home office of Steiner Tractor Parts, Lennon, Michigan.
Anytime, Max. You're always welcome.
New parts for old tractors, as he was showing us there.
Well, Max, I can tell you're in good company up there, hanging out with tractor people who just like talking with other tractor people. Thanks for filling us in on that most recent update on the Steiner stories. And folks, thanks to all of you for tuning in this week. Be sure to catch us next time. We'll cover all the issues that matter to agriculture right here on This Week in Agribusiness.
This Week in Agribusiness has been brought to you by Case IH. Solutions for every challenge. Equipment for every farm. Case IH, built by farmers. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by 22 Creative Group and has been a presentation of Farm Progress Broadcast. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.